The Velos was a Fletcher-class destroyer of the United States and Greek navies. Originally the USS Charrette, the ship was launched in June 1942 and commissioned into the US Navy in May 1943, carrying the normal Fletcher-class main armament, but initially somewhat short on light and medium anti-aircraft guns. Being built on the East Coast, she worked up there before escorting other US Navy ships to Pearl Harbor and finally entering the active part of World War II in the last quarter of 1943, escorting a number of carrier and battleship groups as well as taking part in shore bombardment support operations. The next year was spent in similar escorting mission profiles, with occasional more exciting departures which included tracking and helping to sink the submarine I-175 and taking part in the chase and sinking of Japanese shipping that was escaping from the Truk naval base, which would see, amongst others, the sinking of the cruiser Katori. Later in the year, she would also share in catching and sinking a small Japanese freighter, which found itself in the path of the US carrier groups assaulting Iwo Jima. During the Battle of the Philippine Sea, alongside the normal duties of carrier escort, she would also act as a beacon for aircraft returning in the dark, flashing lights to signal the way to carriers, for some, and rescuing pilots, in other cases, when their aircraft ran out of fuel. As US forces closed on the Philippines, she would be present for the Battle of Leyte Gulf, but missed the chance to join in the heroics of her sisters Howell and Johnston, as she was instead attached to Halsey's carriers as they went after the Northern Decoy Force. 1945 saw something of a change of pace, with escort operations mixed with more independent patrol duty, which included the capture of a supposed hospital ship that, upon inspection, turned out to be something more like a troop transport. After the war ended, and a brief period was spent shuttling troops and supplies around the area, she came back to the USA to be placed in reserve. However, after 13 years in mothballs, she was given a second chance at service, being transferred in 1959 into the service of the Hellenic Navy and being renamed to the Velos, or Arrow. In this guise, she was refitted, losing a main gun, her anti-aircraft battery, and one of the quintuple torpedo launchers, and instead receiving heavier 3-inch anti-aircraft guns and a pair of anti-submarine torpedo tubes, alongside a full sensor suite upgrade. In this revised form, she would be a regular feature in various NATO exercises, and of course, since this is Greece, she would also face off against Turkey in no less than 4 separate confrontations. It wasn't all fun and pointing guns across the Bosporus, though, enjoyable though that may be. In the 1970s, the ship mutinied against the Greek government, which from the late 1960s onwards had been of a decidedly authoritarian inclination, and as a result of that mutiny, during a NATO exercise, the ship sailed for Italy. Many of the officers, led by Commander Nikos Papas, remained in Italy under asylum as political refugees, whilst, with the officers' blessing, the crew, who largely agreed with the officers' positions, would bring the ship back to Greece largely in order to avoid reprisals against their families. Most of the officers who stayed in Italy would eventually return to the Navy when the political landscape shifted the following year with the fall of the government that they had revolted against, with Papas eventually becoming an admiral. Having served in the Greek Navy for 32 years, Velos was decommissioned for a second time in 1991, but instead of being scrapped, she was declared a museum in 1994, and in 2000 she would enter a 2-year restoration and conversion period, finally opening in 2002 as a museum ship alongside the Georgios Averof and a number of other Greek ships, both authentic and replica. Although interesting in and of herself as an example of the modified Cold War-era Fletcher class, she is also preserved as the primary museum ship covering the Greek dictatorial period from 1967 to 1974, which is, of course, the government that her crew mutinied against, and by said mutiny, helped to weaken, which would eventually result in it being brought down.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.